All right. So today's a very exciting day. We're going to learn about the JavaScript document object model, or as it's commonly referred to, the DOM, and why it's so important for websites and HTML documents and JavaScript. And so in part one of the lesson, we'll talk about what it is. We'll see how to iterate through it. It's actually a tree. We'll see how to manipulate it. We'll see how to add JavaScript to my HTML page so I can interact with the DOM and with my HTML page, and just different ways to do that. And then starting to interact a bit more with HTML, with some functions, and maybe with a little bit of CSS. When we get into part two, we'll go deeper. We'll actually be creating CSS, and we'll get into what are called events and event bubbling, and event listeners and event propagation, and working with forms in HTML. I do want to say that it's really important to get a good understanding of what the goals and the not goals of today are. One of the goals is to um, get an understanding of fundamental technologies, right? Which is really DOM, events, and event bubbling, aka event propagation, and using JS to interact with HTML and the DOM. It's also important though to kind of see what are not goals for today. And today is actually not about learning modern best practices. We are actually learning the old way of doing things today. Later, when we learn React.js, it will do a lot of this work for us, but we need to understand what React will be doing. So this is really important. Some of the assignments and things we'll see today are going to feel like there's a little bit of extra effort, and there is. But the goal here is to understand these things so that once we start using the more advanced tools, we really know what they're doing, and it's not a black box. And because you still need to understand this stuff. So I want to point that out, because I think that's a common issue that folks raise, and they're correct that in a lot of ways, what we're doing today is a little onerous, and it's actually not how modern like front end engineering is done. But it will give us a really strong understanding of these concepts that have been around since not quite entirely unchanged, but largely the same since maybe the 90s. So that's almost like 30 years now, which is amazing. So these technologies really have been around for a while. So let's go ahead and let's dive on in. And I have an HTML page up here. We talked about HTML the other day. We talked about how there's different elements, and there's the HTML element, the head that sort of has metadata, and a body. And I can have a header tag in a body. And in fact, let me go ahead and run this with live server. And in fact, I already should be, if I go over here, and this should be my VS Code live server, which there's like a little go live button down here in the bottom right, that one can click on when you have an HTML page up. And again, don't code along today. I don't recommend it. And actually, give me just one moment, and I'm going to disable an extension. It is disabled. Okay, that's disappointing. I was hoping to get rid of this little where it's hiding the class names, but it seems to still be Let's see if that does it. There we go. That's what I was looking for. So once you are really used to writing lots of HTML, that extension that would sort of fold or hide the HTML class name as we start adding lots of different classes is really useful. But right now, for learning purposes, I wanted it to be disabled. So I have a live server running, and as I modify my HTML page, it should then modify this. And it looks actually like my live server is down. So let's bring it back up. There we go. And that was the Command Shift P or Control Shift P VS Code keyboard shortcut to open up the command palette. And now when I modify something through the magic of the VS Code Live Server extension, it modifies the HTML for me. And we saw how an HTML document is structured, right? And it has these different parts, right? And there's the header, there's the main section. Inside the main section, there's different divs. There's a footer that has things as well. But how do I get from this text, albeit although this text is really already kind of structured looking with all of the angle brackets and everything, to the website actually rendering this and showing it here in the Elements tab and being able to do all sorts of interesting things with it. And not just here, but as we'll see in a minute, with JavaScript as well. Right. And in order to be able to do stuff like this, or we're going to talk about how this works in just a moment. But if I do document body in the JavaScript console, right, where I can write JavaScript and do all the normal JavaScript things. Such as um, I had a typo there. I forgot the S in get elements by class name. I'm getting these JavaScript objects that somehow relate to my HTML. So what's going on here? And what's going on is that when the browser reads that HTML file, it turns it basically the browser is running a bunch of JavaScript. It's running a JavaScript engine. And the browser was originally the only place we could run JavaScript until Node.js came around. And it reads that HTML file and it creates a bunch of objects, right? And this is called the document object model. And as we can sort of infer here from this diagram, it's a tree structure. But let's go ahead and let's break this down a bit because this is going to sort of be the foundation for everything else. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do a little bit of collapsing here in the HTML just to make stuff a bit more readable. And let's make a TL draw and let's talk about what the structure of this document is. Because I think a diagram is always the best way when possible to start really understanding stuff. So here we have my HTML document and we know it has a body. And we see that the body has a header section. And inside there is also a nav section. And our nav has these three list items. And if we keep on going, we see we have a main section that then has two divs. And let's go ahead and create that. And we'll kind of just move this up a bit. And inside each of these divs is a paragraph element. So let me go ahead and let's put another box in here. And we have a div. And really, for sort of readability, I'll make these look like tags. So it helps us kind of remember what these represent. And just in laziness, I'm just going to leave the list elements as is. So we've got a paragraph tag, and then we've got our div, and we have two of these. And of course, we have the sort of parent HTML document or HTML element that everything is contained inside. All right, and so this is the structure of our HTML document. And if we go over here, we see the same thing. And if we use the element inspector, we see this as well. And inside the header, we have an H1, so I'll add that to our diagram in just a minute. And we'll just kind of put the H1 there. So what happens is that live server sends this HTML file as text over to the browser. And if we go all the way up, we can see the client server communication between my browser client and the live server program running in the VS Code extension. And we see here my browser requests index.html from live server, and live server sends back all of this text. And the browser, the same way that the Python interpreter, when it reads our Python code, or Node.js reading JavaScript code, and HTML is code. It's a markup language, right? It's not a full-on programming language. And the browser goes through and reads it line by line. And as it does that, when it sees certain tags like this link tag, it makes another request to the server to load that CSS file. And as it goes through this, it builds what's called a document object model. And it does this by, you could think of this, and we'll see what this looks like in JavaScript in just a minute, but it's building a tree in its memory. It's using a tree data structure. And at the top here, we have HTML. And we say that HTML is a parent element, and then head is a child element. And the head we don't worry about because it's a little special. So body is sort of the next child element here. And if we look at the body, we see that it too, it's both a parent and a child. It's got a header and it's got a nav, right? And what about, say, this header element? What's a child of my header element in this sort of tree structure? Alex, yes, sir.
Looking like H1. Oh, in the header, yeah, H1.
Yeah,
Uh,
the header has an H1. And let's see if I can draw this out correctly. We'll put that there and we'll steal this guy. And we'll put the H1 over here. Well, let's shrink it down a bit. Save a little space. And we got H1. What about my nav element? What are some children of the nav element? Anyone? Not a trick question.
List items.
Delete. Yeah.
Yeah, list items. And Arnold, I see you were tackling as well. Right. And my nav element has, we say inside of it, or as child elements, these three list items. Right. And to kind of go back to the actual live website, if I use the element inspector, we can see here I've got my nav element, and then inside it, these three list items. So let me go ahead, let's grab that. And we've got one list item, two list items, and three. Right. And yeah, I'll just kind of, let's see if we can't shrink this guy up a bit. There we go. Just kind of put that here. Right. So header and nav are siblings. They're at the same level of the tree. And again, we see that an element, it's really normal for an element to both be a parent and a child. And if we went on, we could build out right after header, there's main, and I won't go too deep into this in the interest of time. But we see that the main element has two divs. And then inside that are the paragraph tags, right? So I think the next question is, all right, I'm talking about a tree data structure, but how does this actually work? And I'm going to write some pseudocode JavaScript here. This might not be exactly the way the browser does it, but it's pretty close. We can imagine that we have a JavaScript program running, that the browser is running this DOM program, and it takes this HTML, the HTML text, and it turns it into a bunch of objects. And so for our top level element, maybe we have an object named HTML, and there's a property named body. Now there's also head, right, which is not the header, but is metadata. And that could be here too, but we won't worry about that right now. And inside that body, we see we have a header, and that has an H1 element. And for the moment, let's say that this just then has our message, or the content of this element, which in this case is JS DOM is cool. And in fact, there's a bit more going on. So for the moment, let's say maybe that lives in a property named value, and we'll call it JS DOM is cool. And in fact, it lives in a property called inner text, which we'll see come up in a little bit. And now, if I wanted to have my next element, it would clearly be the nav. And it has a list element. And I'm just going to leave these as empty objects just for illustration purposes. And we would have main, right? And this has a div. And inside there is another div. And I did forget the footer of our document. So I do apologize if we go all the way down here. We have a footer after main. So I missed that in the diagram, but I think we get the idea. And I just want to pause here and see what questions folks have or what people might be curious about. Alex, yes, sir.
So is this actually what's happening, or is this for example purposes? It's just a bunch of nested objects.
It is very close to what's happening. It is close enough. We're going to add a little bit more to this. But this is close enough that this is a very good way to imagine that this is what is happening. Um, there are lots of different ways to store a tree data structure, but with JavaScript, a bunch of nested objects is a really good way to do it. Um, and in fact, React.js does pretty much exactly this. So this is we'll add on to this. I'm going to be doing some modifications to this as we get going, but yeah, this is pretty close. Yeah, good question. What other questions do folks have? AJ, yes, sir.
So when you get deep into this structure, does it become like harder to read, or do we just get used to the amount of symbols? Because I just noticed that there were symbols everywhere for everything at every point. So I'm just wondering if it's something we just get used to, or is there readability issues in this uh uh, uh I forget what it's called.
Yeah, that's a great question. It does get harder to read. We do get used to it, and then we'll also see in just a minute that um, there's some ways we can interact with this that make it easier to work with. Alex, yes, sir. And then I do want to move on.
I don't know if this is correct terminology or anything, but is DOM solely for browser readability, or the same way we accessed our REST API yesterday with curl, is that related? You're muted, Adam.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, great question. They are two different things. The document object model is just about the browser and how it turns HTML into basically a bunch of JavaScript objects so we can sort of have this tree in memory so we can render stuff to the screen and I can like click on things. Like how does the browser know when I'm hovering over this home element? It needs to have some idea that this home element exists and is over here on the screen and is not over here. So it can change the mouse from a normal pointer to the little sort of, hovering finger ready to click. Or when I click on something, how does it change the color? What this hat, I think the similarity you're seeing is just the JavaScript part, right? JSON is called JavaScript object notation. And so this is a bit much, but with a REST API like the Poke API, and we can use this endpoint actually. The only thing these two things share is they're both basically using the, the JavaScript objects to represent data, right? This is text kind of organized in this JavaScript object way. But this is JavaScript objects used to like represent an HTML doc. Does that help answer your question a bit? Yeah, good question. And we'll see this sort of JavaScript object notation everywhere. So let's dig a bit deeper into this and let's take this example and make it a little bit more real. So if I type document in here, we see that there's this JavaScript, it's got to be an object or a class or something. And in fact, it refers to the whole HTML document. And we get some really nicely formatted information about it when I type it here in the JavaScript console. And so this is JavaScript I'm running in my browser. And sort of according to our model here, I should be able to grab different elements on the document. And the document kind of starts here with the HTML element. So we sort of skip it. And if I do document body, indeed we see we have the body here, which is great. And it kind of, again, pretty prints the whole body. But if I do document dot body dot header, I don't see anything. And in fact, the way that the document object model works is there is document dot body dot children. And this is basically an array or a list. And we see here again, there's a lot of pretty printing and formatting going on here. And we see this as 4 things inside of it, right? So in fact, what's happening here is we have this property children, right? And then all of these other things live inside that. And let's see, what does this not like with my syntax? Oh, I see. So let's in fact take this over here. Let's just paste it in here and give me a sec here to do a little bit of formatting. And so as we start to work with these objects, it starts to look a little different. And I main should actually be outside of the header. I apologize. I think I got that wrong when I was doing this. And so again, document.body.children gives me an array of these objects, and we have header, main, and then we have the footer, right? And let's go ahead and let's make a footer object. And we'll just make it an empty object just for simplicity. And if I wanted to grab one of these children, just like I would to grab any item in an array, I could give the index of it. Right? So for example, I could do header equals document.body sub 0. Oh, excuse me, document.body.children sub 0. And now I have this object holding my header. But the same way that I can't just do like header.nav, inside the header, there's also a children array. And inside there, we see the h1 and the nav. Right? So in fact, my header object has a children array. And inside that are h1 and nav. And so I could do document.body sub 0. And this is my header, or body.children sub 0. And that's my header. From here, how could I grab, say, this second list item here. How would I have to modify this code so that it's returning this second item here inside the nav, the second list item? Tommy,
Wouldn't it
so
be a 1?
sorry, I saw a couple hands go up. Tom, I think you were first out the gate.
Oh, it's just purely a guess, but like he was saying, maybe it's another index in addition to that one, or maybe dot children and then another index after that.
Yeah. So body document.body.children sub-zero gives me the header. I know that the header also has a children array. So I need to do dot children again. And we see that this gives me H1 and nav. So which element in the list? So how do I access that item in my array or list here? Rick, yes, sir.
It's a same as the index, so you would just do index 1 to get the second index.
Yep. And then from here, how do I get to this middle list item?
Well, I thought that's what we were.
So this has gotten us to the nav.
Dot children again.
Yep, we got to do dot children again. And we see here, we kind of have this nice sort of printed out hint. And we see that the children is an array of 3 things. And I want not the first list item, but the second one. Right? And so we see this same structure repeated over and over and over. Our nav object has children. And inside here are the list items. And truthfully, each of these list items has children as well, or would if they had stuff inside of them. So in fact, now we're getting a more accurate picture of the document object model. Each element, if it has other elements inside it, those go in an array called children. And the nice thing about this is now all of my objects have a really consistent shape, right? And maybe this div doesn't have any children, though in fact it does. It has a paragraph tag. But that doesn't have any children. And let's put it like this. And in fact, as we get deeper into this, let's look at one of these elements maybe and see what properties it has. So let's assign this to a list item. And if we console log out this list item, we see a whole bunch of stuff, right? And so in fact, maybe as we start to get deeper into this, you know, maybe there's like element type property or something that has the name of what kind of item it is. And I think I'm going to get, and let's so if this is our div, forgive me, maybe our object looks something more like that, right? And just in the interest of simplicity, I'm just going to put element type div here. And so we do have a lot of nested objects. Right? But as we start to get more and more used to this, it becomes easier and easier to work with. And this starts to get useful because maybe I want to change the value of, let's say, this H1. And so I could do document.body.children. And I think it's going to be the first one. And let's make sure I have that right. And that gives me my header. Right, but I want to go inside the header and I want to get that H1 element. And maybe I want to change the value of what that H1 element is saying. And there's this attribute inner HTML or inner text. And if I change that, it actually changes the document object model and it changes what the browser renders. Right, so let me kind of walk through this one more time. I want to grab an H1 element. I know that it lives in the document, in the body. I know that it's one of the children of the body element. I know that it is the first one. Right, if we kind of look at our diagram here, we have our, I got a little lost in the sauce here with header and main and everything. So I apologize. I think I might have screwed up my diagram along the way, but here we go. Here's sort of the main one. We have HTML body. The body has children, and inside the children is the header. And we know the header also has children, right? And the children of the header are an H1 and a nav. And every single element has a whole bunch of different properties. And one of those is there's inner HTML and there's inner text. And this actually changes the value of the text this element or node, as it's called in the document object model, is displaying. And so now I can write like a JavaScript function, say, let's do const render hello. I'm going to make an arrow function and it's going to take in an element. We'll call it a DOM element as an argument. And it's going to, for that DOM element, and let's also, it's going to change the inner HTML to say, hello world. And let's see, what did I not do correctly here? I have a typo right here. So this is, I know we haven't seen this in a while. This is an arrow function. This is the argument it takes in. And this is what I'm having it do. Right? And I'm going to have it change the value of the inner HTML of some node. And if I have my H1, I could do render hello. I could change the H1. Or I could do render hello document body children. And maybe let's grab the first element. Let's stick with the head. But let's try to go into, I think it's the nav. And there are easier ways to do this. But hopefully this will change that second list element if I got this right. And indeed, we see that this was changed to hello world, right? So this is why we talk about a document object model, because this HTML, right? The browser has read it and in essence turned it into a bunch of JavaScript objects, and it's created a whole bunch of element objects. And if we go to the Mozilla Developer Network docs and we scroll down a bit, we see that in fact, there is basically an element JavaScript class, and it has all of these different properties, right? Including element.children and inner HTML. If I wanted to get the last child in an element, outer HTML, and just a whole bunch of things that we can do to it. And we don't have to go through all these things, but we'll be exploring some of them today. Now, the good news is there are easier ways to grab HTML elements that I want to work with. And let me just show this, and then I think we'll pause and take a break. And if I want to get this H1, the sort of standard JavaScript library that every browser has gives us some methods to do this. So I could do document, and instead of trying to access the body property, we can use a method or a function on here. And there's one called get elements by class name. And this will go through the whole document object and return me an array of all the elements who belong to the H1 class. And in this case, there's only one, right? So now if I wanted to do H1 inner text equals goodbye. It should have changed that. I'm a little bit unsure why it didn't. If we do document.get, oh, because it returns an array. I'm so sorry. So in fact, what we need to do here is, this is actually a list of all of the things. So let's call this instead all H1. And now if I do all H1 sub 0, or all H1 sub 1, I may have made an error here. I apologize. Let me break this down into pieces. Get elements by class name. Let's try list element just to mix it up. And I'm getting an empty list back. So I'm clearly doing something wrong here. Or maybe do I need to do document.body? Get elements by class name. And Tom, yes, sir.
When calling it with get elements by class name, do you need the quotation marks?
Oh, I do need the quotation marks. And actually, your question jogged my memory. And the good news here is I was making a really simple mistake for whatever reason that my brain just did not want to see. I was thinking, classes like Python classes, but get elements by class name is about CSS classes, and that's where I was going wrong. So I apologize for the confusion there. If we now do document get elements by class name, and we give it the name of this CSS class that I just added to this H1, or actually we can just use the nav item class that exists. We see here we get three things, and we get those three nav items. If I wanted to grab that H1 by class name, I could do my CSS class. And where I was getting confused and what I was trying to do was I wanted to do document get elements by, I believe it is, it's either element by tag name or get element by name. Yeah, and it's get element by tag name. So I apologize for that confusion there. If I do get elements by tag name, now if I want all of my H1s, I have my one H1. And now if I wanted to change that inner HTML or that inner text, that should work. And if I wanted to grab, say, all of my paragraph elements, right? I have one here inside of a div, and then over here, another one inside of the div. I could do document get elements by tag name. And we could just say P for the paragraph element or tag. And now I have all the paragraphs in a list or an array. And we could look at the first one. And in fact, let's just go ahead and print out that inner HTML, right, or the inner text. And if I wanted to change that first one, or let's change instead the text of the second paragraph. Maybe let's change the HTML and let's change it to maybe something like this. And we'll put a new line statement at the end. And so I got a little confused there with using the wrong sort of selector or query selector as it's called. But we can see that there's a lot of helper methods to grab and interact with the different parts of the document. For instance, this paragraph element over here on the left has an ID attribute. So I could grab by that as well. And now, of course, I could modify that if I wanted. So I can grab, and let's do document get element by ID. And let's look at these in the Mozilla docs. So there's a lot of different methods here that we can use on the document object model. Later on, we'll see how we can add elements. But to just scroll down to get elements, we see that we have a number of helpful tools, right? Get element by ID, get element by class name, the one that I was getting confused about. That's a CSS class and not the type of element that it is. And get element by tag name. Right, and if we take a look just at, let's take a look at get elements by tag name, just to look at the docs a little bit. And we can see that there's this sort of JavaScript type HTML collection that's basically an array, but it returns an array of objects, right? Of element objects. and I give it the name of the element that I'm looking for. And the MDN docs are great because they also have like living examples of this. And so we see here, like in their example, if we scroll all the way down, somewhere in here, they're actually getting element by ID. So this example, they've made it a little complex, but we can see that there's a lot of different things that we can do with this. So let me pause here and take some questions because I realize I've been going for a while, and then we will take a break. So what's on people's minds? I know I kind of covered a lot of ground here. What might be good to review, look at again, or dig into more? Alex, yes, sir.
While you're in that console, are you writing this whole document dot children dot, is this all JavaScript?
It's all JavaScript, yes.
Got it.
Yeah, and basically you can think of it as, in fact, let's go to MDN document. So you can think of this as a document as a class, not as in CSS class, not this kind of class, but like object-oriented programming, like a Python class. We haven't looked at a lot of sort of OOP style stuff in JavaScript, and you kind of avoid it. But the same way, I can have an object that has properties. When I build an object, like let's call this document, that does different things and it has these attributes, I could also, maybe this has an arrow function. So an object, it works differently than Python, but you can have basically methods on JavaScript objects as well. So if this was a Python class, right, we would think of it as having attributes and methods. And I think that's the way to think of this as well. And so this is sort of like the documentation for the document class that has all of these properties and all of these different methods. There's a ton of stuff, as you can see here. We're really going deep into the guts of the browser. But the stuff we need to focus on now is like get element by ID and so on. And the other important thing to know is that this document object, it only exists when I'm running JavaScript in the browser. The browser really kind of builds it for me. If I just had some Node.js code, and I tried to do document get element by ID, putting aside the issue that there's no HTML document here, when I run this code, we're going to get an error saying this document object doesn't even exist. And if I scroll up far enough, we see reference error document is not defined. Right? And so this is the difference between running JavaScript from the command line from my computer with Node.js and running it in the browser. And we'll see how to run JavaScript in the browser with ways other than just typing it in the console after the break. But when I'm running JavaScript that's running in the browser builds that document object for me that has all of these methods and stuff. So all of this stuff really only exists when we're running JavaScript in the browser. Does that help answer your question a bit? Awesome. Yeah, great question. And in fact, after the break, what we'll see is, hey, Adam, it's nice that I can type and run JavaScript in here, but this is kind of a pain. Like, how can I maybe add some JavaScript to my HTML? or even better, put it in a JavaScript file that then gets run in the browser. And that's what we'll pick up after the break. So we've covered what is the document object model, right? And we've seen that it's taking this HTML and turning it into a tree data structure. And it does that using JavaScript objects. And when it does that, each node or element in the tree is a special JavaScript object of a certain type. And it has an array of children, and it has a property inner text. And in fact, it has a whole bunch of different properties. Right? And so now we're starting to see like how the browser really works to take this HTML text and turn it into something like living and breathing that I can interact with, so that when I click on something, the browser knows what to do. And so after the break, we'll see how we can make this happen more nicely with JavaScript code. And we'll also get into interactivity. Sam, yes, sir.
Yeah, so I relatively understand everything that's going on, but I guess kind of my question is like, what's the point? Like, if we can do everything in VS Code, what's the point of doing this stuff in the browser?
Right. I've been using the console here just really for demonstration purposes. What we'll see, and let me just sort of give a bit of a preview here. Let's just put a script tag, and we'll say defer. And so I can write JavaScript in this HTML file. And let's maybe do h1 equals, I guess it should be const h1 equals document get element by tag name. I don't want to make the same mistake I did before. And the tag name will be h1, and it's going to return a list of all the h1s, but there's only one. And let's console log h1 dot inner text just so we can see what it is. And then let's actually change it. And so now when I save this code, the VS Code live server extension is going to refresh this JavaScript, this HTML page, and it's actually going to run the JavaScript I put in the script tag. And it looks like I had an error. Cannot read properties of undefined inner text. So I made some sort of mistake here along the way with document get elements by tag name. Let's in fact just grab this and test it out here in the console to see if I got it right. Oh, and I can't use the const, so that's part of the problem. Let's just do h equals document get elements by tag name. Yeah, so that should be doing it. And I may have to come back to this one after the break to kind of get it working, but because my guess is I might have, yeah, there's something about the inner text it doesn't like or that I don't have right. Because it sure seems to work okay there. But where we're going with this is it's not about typing JavaScript in the console, and it's not even about putting JavaScript in a script tag here. It's about putting JavaScript in a different file and importing that file in my HTML, and then having a function say to grab the user's name from, maybe there's an input element. And I want to grab the user's name, and when they click a button, I want to display a message. But we'll dig into that more after the break. And hopefully that helps kind of illustrate where we're going at least a little bit. All right, guys, thank you. Let's take, why don't we take 15? Because I think we went pretty long there. And then when we reconvene, we will start writing JavaScript code that will be running in our HTML file and adding interactivity, right? So if I'm typing hello world, maybe I'm changing the title of this document. So thank you very much, guys, and I'll see you all in a little bit.